Hey everybody, this is Laurie Meyer from stampedgreetings.com, and I just wanted to pop in and show you a fun card that is made primarily focused on the Christmas Scotty stamp set and the punch that comes with that, the Scotty dog punch. I'll show you those in just a minute, but there are really two different techniques in this card, and it's much easier to see if I bring it up toward the camera. We're going to do a split dry embossing technique. We're going to use one embossing folder and get a really fun effect. And then we're also going to be doing some punch cuts and bring them up on pieces of cardstock to give them a little bit of depth and put this really fun card together. It could be used for many, many different occasions. And I just wanted to show you the products that I'm going to be concentrating on. These are in the new holiday catalog. They're on page 34. There is a really nice stamp set that is the Christmas Scotty stamp set. We had a Scotty dog when I was a teenager, and when I saw this set, I had to get it. Her name was Bridget. She was my absolutely favorite dog ever, ever, ever in the world. And those stamps really remind me of her. So there was a method to my madness of getting the stamp set. And then also it has a corresponding punch, which is super cute. It's really, really fun to use. And before I jump in, I want to show you a couple of additional examples. And I'm going to come back to these after, but I'll give you a little bit of a preview. This is an additional example of the technique. So again, this is a split dry embossing. This used the brick and mortar 3D embossing folder. And then I brought in a couple of different products. I used one of the stamps from the Quiet Meadow stamp set. And then I used the bottle punch, just something a little bit different. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then another version of this card, and again, it's a little hard to see unless I pull it up to the light. We've got the split dry embossing top and bottom. And on these, the Scotties are punched out with the same punch, but the bottom layer of cardstock that shows off the color is the color of the designer series paper. And I'll bring this back and we'll take a look in a couple of minutes at the difference between the techniques that I'm going to use. So what I'd like to do over the next couple of minutes is pretty much replicate this card. And I'm going to show you how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. You are going to need two pieces of cardstock. One is a piece of white cardstock, and this is just basic white. It is 8.5 by 11, so a standard piece of white cardstock. And then I have a standard piece of black cardstock, 8.5 by 11. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down the 8.5 by 11. And notice that this is a slimline card. And I'll give you the dimensions. It is made to fit into one of the Stampin' Up! Slimline envelopes. And we'll look at that packaging in just a few minutes. But the first thing that you want to do is you want to grab your paper trimmer, and on the 11-inch side, so you're going to put your paper in on the 11-inch side, and you are going to cut off 4 inches. So if you cut off 4 inches from the 11-inch side, you are going to end up with 2 pieces of paper, one that is 7 inches by 8.5. This is going to be the card base. The other is 4 inches by 8.5, and we're going to cut this down to make it the front of the card. So I've got my larger piece. This is the one that measures 7 by 8.5. I'm going to put that back into the paper trimmer, and I'm going to be incredibly careful because I don't want to cut this. I want to score it. So I'm putting my cutting blade way up at the top, and I'm going to pull in my scoring blade, which is a gray blade, which is down at the bottom. And I am going to score this at 3.5 on 7 inches. So right in half. So just give that a nice score. And that is going to end up being my card base. Okay, so we've got our card base. And then we are also going to create the front that we're going to use for the embossing and for the design. That is going to come from the other piece that was part of our original 8.5 by 11. We have a piece that's left that's 4 inches by 8.5. We want to cut this down to be 3.25. So I'm going to take this and put it in my trimmer, cut that down to 3.25. This is extra. You can keep it or toss it, whatever you would like to do. And then on the 8.5 inch side, I want to get this down to 8.25. So I'm just going to cut off 1/4 of an inch, and I'm putting that over on the right. So I'm going to cut that down to 1/4 of an inch. So I have 2 of the 3 pieces of paper that I'm going to need for the card. I've got my card base, and I have the piece that is going to be the focal point. The last piece that I'm going to need is going to be the black frame that is going to go around that focal point in the front. And I'm going to make that from a piece of basic black. And I want this to be, when I'm done, the measurement of the single frame piece is going to be 3 3/8 by 8 3/8. And I'll put these in the notes so you have the dimensions of everything. But 3 3/8 by 8 3/8. And the way that I'm going to do this is I know that the width of this paper is 8.5. I want it to be 8 3/8. So to get it to 8 3/8, I am just going to cut off 1/8 of an inch. It's super, super small. So I'm just going to cut off 1/8 of an inch. And then I will go ahead and cut these to 3 3/8 in terms of width. And 3/8 is in between 1/4 and 1/2. And there we have our 3 pieces. And I'm going to give you the dimensions on these one more time, and I will have them written down as well. So we are going to have our base, which is 8.5 by 7, scored at 3.5. So scored right in the middle at 3.5. And that is going to give us our card base. The frame that we're going to use right on top of that card base is a piece of black, and that is measured at 3 3/8 by 8 3/8. And you'll see that there's a nice border all the way around. And then the focal point is going to go on the top of that, and it's going to have a nice border, again with the black. This piece is 3 1/4 by 8 1/4. So 3 1/4 by 8 1/4. These are the pieces that you're going to need for this kind of card. And I want to show you that it will fit incredibly well into one of the slimline envelopes that Stampin' Up! Makes. Now, I will separately, when I write up the directions, I will give you an alternative way to cut this paper that will fit into a business size envelope. So you'll have 2 ways to make this. But let's get to the real interesting part, because you can do what I'm going to show you next on any size card. And I think I showed you that when I brought out this card, which is an A2. So if you want to use an A2 size for this technique, it works exactly the same. You can do it in a portrait view. You can do it in a landscape view, whatever you would like. but I just thought this size was kind of fun to play with. So we have our paper. The next thing we do is we're going to do our dry embossing. And the way that you do the dry embossing is you are going to pick an embossing folder that you really think would work well with your design. And that embossing folder can be just about any pattern. I decided that I was going to use the one that has the gingham. It just, to me, looked fun because I was also going to be playing with the plaids. So I wanted to marry the gingham and the plaids together. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start by doing what is called dry fitting. And what that really means is we are going to arrange the final design and just put it together without gluing, without doing anything that's permanent, just to see where we want to go with this design. And I'm going to show you in just a minute how I made these little Scotties and give you some tips and tricks for any other designs that you might want to do. But right now, what I'm doing is I'm just dry fitting. I'm putting these pieces onto the card to figure out where I might want them when I put everything together. And as I'm doing this, let me share with you how I made these little pieces. And it's not anything difficult. There are a couple of little tricks and tips that I wanted to share. Obviously, I used the punch that comes with the bundle. And one of the things that I really like about punches is they are very portable, and also they're really easy to use. Dies are easy as well, but with the punches, I just feel you have a little bit more freedom sometimes. And you're going to notice that on the card, we have some Scotties that are facing to the right, some that are facing to the left. Again, this isn't magic at all, but I just wanted to show you what I did. I used the new In Color 6x6 designer series paper, and I have used this to the point that it's kind of embarrassing. I will share this with you. I am saving scraps that look like this. I just can't throw them out. I know that there is some project that is going to call for this little teeny piece of designer series paper that I'll be able to cut out from that. So I'm saving it. Don't know what I'll do with these, but why not? So as I was thinking about putting the card together that I'm showing you today, I grabbed this paper and I thought, oh, this will work wonderfully. And I only had enough of the plaid from the package, the original package, to cut out these 4. Tells you how much I've used that designer series paper. So I had to go to the polka dots and the flowers, but you know what? That's fine. But here, this isn't magical. If I put my little punch in here and I just punch out a Scotty dog, I'm obviously going to have 2 versions of this little guy to choose from. I can have him going to the right. I can have him going to the left. So using designer series paper, and this is true not only for punches, but also for dies, you're going to have 2 options. And that's simply what I did. I got out my paper. I figured out which of the dogs I wanted going in which direction. And for this particular card, I chose that I'll have the 2 polka dots at the top, and then these are the ones that have the flowers. I wanted to give these some height. I just wanted to make them a little bit more than simply adhering the designer series paper to the cardstock. So what I did for each one of these is I punched, 2 of the dog outlines from black cardstock. And I chose black because you'll see on the final card, if I turn it just a little bit, you can really see the color because it pops with that black cardstock underneath. And then especially when I add the bow that I punched out as well. And this is a tip. When you are putting these together, I'm going to put one black piece on top of another. And when you do this, a couple of things, and this comes from me experimenting. You do not want to put a lot of glue. It will ooze out. And when you put the glue on, try to get it toward the edge of the design. Otherwise, what can happen is you might see that the edges start to pop up, and you definitely don't want that. You don't need a ton of glue, and it's very forgiving. Just, kind of pull the pieces together, line up the design, and you're good to go. And then the same thing when you add that final piece on the top, same thing, just put glue around the edge. Don't put it everywhere. I think if you put a lot of glue, at least my tendency, if I put a lot of glue, I don't put it at the edge because I know it's going to ooze out. And then what happened was my edges weren't really glued together, and you could see that there were places where the paper was coming up, and it just didn't look that great. So I'm just gonna put that right on top. And then with the punch, you also get a little bow. So when you punch out your paper, you're gonna get a little bow, and I'm just gonna add that right to the top. The other three are already done. I just had one left that I wanted to do and show you how I did it. And again, it's nothing mystical, magical, and I'm trying to get the bows to look the same. We'll see. Hopefully they look sort of the same. All right, so I have my poor little dogs now. Now we're going to get to the dry embossing. And here's where we're going. We're going to do a pattern on the bottom, and we're going to do a pattern on the top. But notice there's a place in the middle where there's no embossing. And that's really where we're going for. We're going to leave this unembossed so that we can put a sentiment. We can stamp a sentiment there. So what I want to do is I want to place my little Scotty dogs at a point where I can figure out kind of where the middle is. And I know the sentiment that I'm going to be using. So I am just going to grab a ruler, and I am going to measure where I want to have my embossing start and my embossing end. And I do want it to go all the way to the end. So if I just grab a ruler and a little pencil and I turn it on the right side with inches, I can see that, all right, I'm starting up at the top. And if I'm starting at 2, if I get down to about 5.5, so right around 3.5 inches, I'm just going to put a little ruler mark. And then down at the bottom, I'm going to see if I do 3.5 inches. So that would be right about here. I'll have enough room to get my little dogs in here. And in between those 2 little tick marks, I'm going to have plenty of room to put my sentiment. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to get these little guys off to the side. And then I'm going to bring in my embossing folder. And here's what I'm going to do. I have a tick mark. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit. So I've got a tick mark that is right here and another one that is right here. And what I want to do is I want to emboss everything below, and then I want to emboss everything above. So I'm going to take my embossing folder. One thing to notice when you're doing this is that the embossing on your embossing folder starts up at the top of the plastic, not where that line is. So don't get fooled that the embossing design starts where that line is. It does not. So look at where my line is, that first line. I'm going to put that right at the top. And then I'm just going to line up my paper and try to get that straight on the side. And I'm going to run that through my embossing folder. And through the magic of television, here's what that looks like. So I ran that through my embossing folder. You can see that I have my little tick mark right there. I'm going to go ahead and erase that little pencil mark. I just don't want that showing when everything is all said and done. And I'm going to flip my paper over. So now I've got this other tick mark right there. And I'm going to do the same thing. Now, again, I am really paying attention to the fact that when I put that embossing folder on, the design starts right up here and my tick mark is right there. And with a design like this, you may want to try to match where that design goes so it looks like it flows all the way to the bottom. That's up to you. You definitely can do that. And you're going to line things up, get the same amount of space on the right side of your embossing folder, run it through your embossing machine, and through the magic of television, this is what you're going to end up with. So you've got embossing on the top, you've got embossing on the bottom, and you've got plenty of room in the middle to put whatever kind of sentiment you want to use. I'm just grabbing my scoring board because I left that over on my shelf. Now, this is perfectly fine. You don't need to, do anything else. But what I like to do is add just a little bit of definition as far as where that area ends. So I'm just going to kind of put my piece into a scoring board, and I'm just going to give that a little bit more definition. And I'll come over to the other side and give that a little bit more as well. And if you want, I'm going to just add one more just because I feel like it. And one more. And that's going to give it just a nice little finish in the middle. And we're still working with that one piece of paper. So once that dry embossing is done, you can go ahead and add your sentiment. And for this card, I decided that I was going to use a different sentiment. I'm using one that is actually from the gorgeous Season of Chic stamp set. And I thought that would be really nice. It says, thinking of you. There are several in this stamp set that are perfect for many, many different occasions. And this one I've already set up in my Stamparatus. I will tell you a story, brief one. My husband and I were on vacation recently, and I left my Stamparatus at home. I did it intentionally. I wanted to minimize what I was packing. And I decided that I was going to bring another brand of a stamp positioning tool with me. And it's a great brand. I've used it a lot over the years. And I got up to where we were staying, got out my stamping stuff, and I had this grand plan of what I wanted to actually stamp. And the darn thing would not, it just would not fit. I had a larger piece of paper that I wanted to get into the platform that I was using, and it was just frustrating. So when we got home, I really, really appreciated the fact that I had my Stamparatus and I was able to use it. This is just an amazing, amazing tool, not just for stamping, there are a lot of things that the Stamparatus can do. And I've shown you those too, where it can act as like a second hand. So I'm just going to go ahead and stamp my grading right in the middle. Give that a little bit more ink. I really like the font on this too. Really, really nice. And then once we get done with this sentiment, essentially we're just going to be putting everything together. And one part of the bottom of the G, just want to make sure that that looks like it's stamped correctly. And that's the beauty of using the Stamparatus. You can go back over until you're really happy with how it comes out. All right. So we are at the point where we can start putting this card together. And we are going to start with the card base and add the black to that. So I've got my card base right here. And I'm just going to go bottoms up and start with the black frame. And this is really pretty quick to put together. There are so many ways that you can do cards like this with this basic design. I'm really anxious to play with 2 different embossing folders. You know, completely different patterns, different ideas, different ways that you can finish the card. I think that would look really, really pretty. So I'm just going to get this as centered as I can. Move that around just a little bit here. That's why I like the liquid glue. Got a little bit of freedom to move that around. I'm going to go ahead and put the focal point piece on as well. And then we're going to start putting the little Scotty dogs on. I do recommend that when you're putting a large card together, that if you can, you put the pieces together in this order. It is, in my opinion, if the design allows, it's just a little bit easier because you're going to be building it up. All right, so there we've got our basic little card. And now I'm going to bring these little guys in, or maybe little ladies. We'll call them ladies. And I'm just going to space them out. Try to get them fairly consistent as far as where they are landing on the card. Yeah, that looks pretty okay. And then I'm just going to go ahead and glue them down. I think these little guys would also look super cute with some Christmas plaids. There's some really nice holiday stamps that are in the set as well. There's a Merry Christmas, some other ones. So this could be a very unique Christmas card. And I will play around with that. There's some very fun ornaments that Stampin' Up! Has in the holiday catalog. They look like little bells, and they would be incredibly cute rather than the bows to put those little bells on. And then I'm going to go from the bottom up. The reason I'm going from the bottom up when I'm adhering down here is I want to try to get the spacing about the same as I did on the top. And I'm going to have better luck, and there'll be more forgiveness on this middle one if it's a little bit different. And I'm just going to add those little guys on. And you can add more bling to this if you want. You know, you could, if you, for example, and I played around, and I'll show you the other examples that I had. There's one that has some twine that is tied where that scoring happened. You know, so you can define the middle a little bit more if you want to, or you can leave it like this. And the folks who see this card in person are going to notice there definitely is definition. And then you may want to add some bling. The bling, totally up to you. I need to order some more bling. I'm almost blingless. Blingless is not a happy thing to be. I have been using so many of these basic jewels. You can see that I am just about out. And I can also tell that I had a little blurb of ink. Not anymore. It is gone. That's why we love our little gems. And I'm just going to put a couple of these sort of randomly around up and down the card, just to give it a little bit of a pop. Different patterns, maybe going with odd numbers as usual. And let's see. I try not to overthink when I do this, because when I overthink, inevitably it looks like I've planned something. And we're almost done with this. But I hope you can see that you have tons of options in terms of the different shapes. You know, think about using dies. You don't need to use a punch. You could use maybe a daisy die. And one thing I was thinking with daisies that would be really pretty is die cut or punch out daisies in all colors of the rainbow. And you could have them just cascading down the card, and a really pretty embossing design, maybe a flower embossing that would show off that flower theme. So there we go. There's the card. Let me bring back the one that I did originally. And it's very, very, very similar. The colors are just a little bit different. Obviously, the patterns are a little bit different. And the last thing that I did for the card was I used one of the slimline envelopes that Stampin' Up! Has. And I took a piece of the designer series paper that matched one of the little dogs, adhered that piece to the flap, and then just trimmed off the excess. So I've got a really pretty envelope that goes with the card. And the other examples that I showed you, I'll just bring those back in really quickly. This is one where you can define where that score line is if you want to, just to give it a little bit of a different look. And then the other one that is definitely a different look is the smaller A2 card. And like I mentioned before, the difference between these two cards, not only size, but also the colors that are underneath the pieces that are the Scotty dogs. You can see here, these were made with white cardstock. And then underneath, I used the same cardstock color as I had for the bow. And it just kind of pulls that color out as well. So I invite you to try this. The split dry embossing it's a lot of fun, and the possibilities are pretty endless. Go take a look at your embossing folders and see what you have, because I think you'll find that there's some that you'll really enjoy using in this technique. So until next time, happy stamping.